All right, so very quickly, let's talk about the last three, inverse cosine, inverse cotangent, inverse cosecant. I've already written some information out here. We've got the three derivatives we found here on the left-hand side, inverse sine, inverse tangent, inverse secant. And in the middle, what I have written is I have written some identities that we are going to use to very quickly find the other three. So the inverse cosine of x is equal to pi over 2 minus inverse sine of x. Well, pretty clear, therefore, that the derivative must just be the negative of the derivative of inverse sine. We can look at inverse cotangent. It's equal to pi over 2 minus inverse tangent of x. And once again, very clearly, the derivative is just the negative derivative of inverse tangent. And similarly, cosecant, here we've got pi over 2 minus inverse secant. And so the derivative, again, must be the negative of the derivative of the inverse secant. Okay, so let's take a look at calculators. So what are we going to do in our calculators? Well, in order to find inverse secant and inverse cosecant, here's what we know. We know that inverse secant is equal to the inverse cosine of 1 over the value of x. Same thing for sine. The inverse cosecant is equal to the inverse sine of 1 over x. Now, we can't use this relationship for cotangent. And here's the problem. If we look at the graph of tangent of 1 over x, notice what happens. We can't have a value of x equal to 0. So we can't use inverse tangent 1 over x to calculate inverse cotangent. But what we can do is we can use that relationship from the previous page where we said that cotangent was equal to that. So three identities, one for inverse secant, one for inverse cosecant, one for inverse cotangent. So in addition to the derivatives, it's useful to have those when you want to do some calculations. You can find the slope of each of the six independently. You can find inverse cosine, inverse sine, and inverse tangent directly, and you can find inverse secant, inverse cosecant, and inverse cotangent by using these relationships. So let's look at a quick example. So the example is we want to find the line tangent to y equals inverse cotangent of x at x equals -1. So first, let's start by finding our point. Well, we know x equals -1. So y is equal to inverse cotangent of -1. And that means that y is equal to pi over 2 minus the inverse tangent of -1. Now, if you plug this into your calculator, I'll do this very quickly. Pi over 2 minus inverse tangent of -1. I get 2.3561949, not rounding off at all. That's not wonderful. So I'm going to very quickly look at my unit circle. And what I remember is that tangent, we generally domain restrict it from here to here when we're dealing with this kind of thing, because the graph of tangent, this is going way, way back, the graph of tangent has asymptotes, and it looks like this. Notice there's the inverse tangent 1 over x, which of course doesn't help us. And so what we're looking at here is we say, well, we're looking for a line with a slope of -1. That means that this is negative pi over 4. And going back to our exact value, we've got pi over 2 minus negative pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 4. This is much preferable to decimals when possible. So the slope, the derivative of inverse cotangent of x is equal to 1 over 1 plus x squared. That's the derivative of inverse tangent with a negative in front of it. And if we plug in x equals -1, we get that this is -1/2. And here we go. Here is the equation of our line. Tangent to the graph of inverse cotangent at x equals 1. All right, guys, there's not going to be a recap video for this. Oh, by the way, if you're in my class, you could go ahead and pause and do exercise 23 or do it when the video ends in just a second. I'm not going to do a recap for this section 4.3. Everything you need to know is here on your 3 calculator identities and here on your 6 inverse trig identities. A recap would be saying and writing those all over again. I recommend you jot those down on a note page, keep them handy, and we'll see you in chapter 4.4. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something.